Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the E.N.G Media Podcast. Today we have a returning guest, Jeff, with the Provenance Chain. For those of you just joining in for the first time, we are E.N.G Media, and we help software and tech companies grow their revenue. So if you want to learn how to scale, feel free to stick around. But Jeff, great to have you back on the show. Last time we talked, we kind of went into why the Provenance Chain exists, essentially to restore trust in commerce through transparency and verifiable data. That episode sparked some messages even in my DMs about from founders and operators trying to figure out how to make their own supply chains a little bit more trustworthy. And it's about 6 months since then, and I know you and the team have been busy. So I'm excited to dig into what's evolved since that first conversation, especially with what's happening in semiconductors. And so,
Well, thanks, Christian. It's great to be back here. I really appreciate you bringing me back. And for any of those people that are reaching out to you, just send them over to the PCN. Operators are standing by. So.
will do. Will do. But my first question for you is, in the last episode, you described PCN as a system of evidence for commerce. Has your definition of that changed at all over the last few months?
No, it has not. That's still what we're planning on, or not planning, what we are building. Since you and I last spoke, several things have happened. Number one, we received the first of our United States patent awards. So we've picked up a patent for the tokenization of digital twins and using the evidence, the claims, tokenizing the claims and then tokenizing the evidence and comparing the two to instill trust in the supply chains. That was the one big announcement. Second big announcement is over the last 45 days or so, we've been around the world in terms of the semiconductor space. We've had several stage appearances. One is Semicon West, that's the trade association for the semiconductor industry globally. We were at IMEC in Brussels, that's the International Consortium for Microelectronics. And then lastly, 2 weeks ago, we were down at Texas A&M in College Station, Texas, where we were with the Texas Semiconductor Symposium. And in all three cases, we were stage appearers, we were panelists, we were running whiteboard sessions, etc. But the big announcement is that the PCN and Cadence Design, the software firm, the electronic design automation software firm, made a joint product announcement. We first announced it in Phoenix, and that is that our two products are going to be integrated and they'll be shipping into beta release in the first quarter of next year. But what that does is, as a semiconductor designer or a microelectronics designer is setting up their design, they're able to tie into the PCN and immediately start setting up supply chain transparency standards, the intellectual property protection, and the selected disclosure and licensing agreement by which that IP is licensed up and down the supply chain. So this is a pretty big announcement. We're on the very, very leading edge of what I would consider to be the complete transformation of the supply chain trust and transparency standards for semiconductors. So pretty important to us.
Of course, and that's awesome. A little jealous that you didn't come say hi to me while you were in Phoenix, but
Well, I wasn't there.
okay.
I had a team of three people who were there, but no, I was off. I was off on some other conversations. So
That's awesome. I'm happy to see what product comes out coming Q1 of next year, and hopefully a lot of the viewers that are tuning in as well are on the lookout for that too. But backing up a little bit, I wanted to go a little bit more into the semiconductors because I remember you saying that this was one of the next major verticals for Provenance Chain. What's really driving all the attention here right now?
well, in one word, China. So the over the last 30 to 40 years, the United States has become very dependent upon global supply chains for the semiconductor and microelectronics industry. And while the United States arguably is the leader in semiconductor design, we are a distant, call it a second or third, in terms of manufacturing capacity for the most advanced chips. All the very advanced stuff, the NVIDIAs and some of those others, are made by TSMC under contract to the designers, but it's not a supply chain and a production environment that's within the control of the United States. And as we start to think about the potential for, at a minimum, economic competition to, at the worst case, a kinetic confrontation, translate that as a war, with a part of the world that we're dependent upon because of our semiconductors and microelectronics, it's very dangerous. It's arguably existential to the Western way of life. And so the CHIPS office, which started, initially got started under the Trump administration, really put forward under the Biden administration and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, and now under the Trump administration and the Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, the United States is spending an enormous amount of time shoring up our critical supply chains, and whether it's rare earth minerals, and we've got energy under control, but rare earth minerals and very, very importantly, semiconductors. We need to fix that. And that's where all that investment's coming from. And when you think about a semiconductor and the layers of substrates that go down, or the layers of etching that goes down onto the substrates, what's really happening there is that a chip designer has assembled layers of intellectual property. So they're layering in, when you're doing system on a chip design, you're layering in, well, the modem technology is coming maybe from Qualcomm, and there's pieces of it coming from Broadcom, CPU functionality is coming from NVIDIA, and that's all packaged together. Well, the control and administration of that intellectual property, the protection of that intellectual property is absolutely paramount. And then there's also the remuneration for who is doing that. And the metaphor that I like to use is, think of it, I use the band The Traveling Wilburys. I know I'm dating myself. But when those 5 guys went into the recording studio, you had 15 corporations that had intellectual property interests when they laid down those tracks. It's no different when TSMC is going and printing the wafers for the semiconductors. They're dealing with the production of a whole lot of different people's intellectual property. So that's the driving force. And I'll put it in one sentence. What's driving it is the United States' economic and national security interests. Period. Hard stop.
100%. And my follow-up for you for that is, how does PCN actually prove the authenticity or the licensing of a semiconductor component without exposing the trade secret that you're talking about?
Well, there's this concept called a zero-knowledge proof, and I'll describe a zero-knowledge proof in the following way. When you walk into a bar, if you will, a club, and you go up to the bartender to order a cocktail, what the bartender is legally allowed to know and legally allowed to ask you is, are you of drinking age in this state? Mm-hmm. But what often happens is we're flashing our driver's license, which is we're oversharing. We're telling them our name, we're telling them birth date, height, weight, eye color, organ donor status. And for many of our population, we're putting ourselves at a lot of risk because we're also exposing our address. And so in that metaphor is the person who's being carded, if you will, has the right to disclose, yes, I'm of drinking age, without having to expose the rest of the data. And so the way that we have applied that zero-knowledge proof concept to the PCN is there are executive orders and laws now that declare you cannot have any of China or this particular thing in your supply chain. And what you need to be able to prove is, here's this claim that I'm conflict-free, I'm forced labor-free, or I'm China-free, and then produce evidence that shows that you are that. And the relationship between the claim and the evidence becomes the zero-knowledge proof, especially if it has been validated by a trusted third party, an inspector of some form, consulting agency, and that kind of work goes on to great effect. Where you can not necessarily disprove those claims, but what you do is you expose aberrations, weaknesses, by disclosing that there's an absence of evidence to support the claim being made. So you draw attention to anomalies or risks. And that's the way that we apply it. Now, depending on who you are, looking at the data sets, your role within governmental oversight, standards compliance, et cetera, may give you viewing rights that allow you to look deeper and deeper into things. And so, for example, one of the areas that we are being asked to support is the whole CFIUS environment, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. So this component is coming out of, well, how do we know who's the money behind that organization? So it's a case where you use zero knowledge proof concepts and you expose, here's the claim that's being made, here's the evidence to support the claim. And that particular architecture of the evidence and the claims and all of that, that's the primary basis of the most recent patent award that we've received. So we're pretty proud of that technology.
100%. I would be proud of it too. That's awesome. And thank you for explaining and going a little bit more in depth and switching a little bit. Someone that commented on our last podcast, so I want to address the question if they're listening again, but are you leveraging existing Oracle networks like Chainlink to verify or exchange data, or did you build your own Provenance stack from the ground up?
It's a combination of the two. So first off, that's a very informed questioner. They know what they're talking about. What we've done with the commercial trust protocols is we've recognized that there are going to be tons of oracles out there. We're using the word oracle with a small o, not Larry Ellison's company, but somebody who provides information and data about something. We recognize that individual industries and or individual companies will have made some technology choices for whatever reason, and those are in place. So we've decided to embrace those. And so we put ourselves at a super level or macro level of ingesting all different kinds of oracles, all different kinds of chains, blockchains, distributed ledgers, et cetera, to provide one system of evidence, which is a methodology by which all of this is evaluated, that protects the intellectual property, keeps it in the control of the person who owns it, and allows for the selective disclosure, the management administration, and most importantly, the monetization of that intellectual property.
Thank you for sharing and answering that user's question I was about to respond to, and I was like, I'm gonna just ask Jeff when we have him back on. So I put it as a note, but thank you. And hopefully this person is viewing it again. But my next question for you is that we talked about trustodians before the last time you were on the podcast. How has this concept maybe shaped in the past 6 months when it comes to semiconductors, or maybe outside? I know we talked about like defense mechanisms too for the U.S. and maybe other things along those lines too.
So first off, the word trustodian is now, because we received word from the USPTO 2 weeks ago, that is now a registered trademark in the United States of America and around the world. And so the trustodian is the brand name for the PCN employees and anybody that has received certification through our process as being a trustodian. And what that means is that we are custodians of people's intellectual property and are entrusted with managing that on their behalf. And so how that's manifesting itself in the marketplace is the way that we're ingesting data, the way that we're evaluating data, and the way that we let our customers and users use our agents, if you will, to take a look at a data set. And one, depending on how they're using the agent, their vantage point, the selective disclosure rules will apply and expose to that person what they're entitled to see based on their role in life and the vantage point at which they're looking at the data from. So what that would look like is, and I think we've used this metaphor before, the conscious Kim in the grocery store looking at, some produce or any other product is going to see certain information based on who she is, which is a very different view of a data set than Colonel Kim would see looking at a rocket on a launch pad, or Semiconductor Sam would see in the whole fabrication process. And so it's this combination of identity, selective disclosure rights for the data owner, and permissible consumption rights for the person who's viewing it. And that permissible consumption environment is our intellectual property environment to talk about how to do that. And that is manifesting itself up and down the technology stack within the semiconductor industry. That's what we have been contracted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology to define. And the 3 announcements that we made on the semiconductors stages over the last 45 days were all in support of that mission, to establish a common lingua franca, if you will, for that industry by which they will license data to each other under selective disclosure and permissible consumption requirements in order to do a number of things. Number one, comply with national security requirements of the United States of America. Number two, comply with the economic security requirements of the United States of America. And third, and to the property owners, is to protect their intellectual property and provide the proper pathway to the economic monetization of that property. So that's what we're up to there.
Definitely. And thank you for explaining that a little in depth, and congrats on the trademark on it. That's awesome that now you guys are kind of own the word essentially. And
Thank
something
you.
you also mentioned on our last podcast was that not all workers will be human in the future, which I would agree with you. But what does that look like in the sense of a trustodian going forward now that AI agents and automation are kind of becoming part of the workforce? And now there's developments of teams being ran completely by automation and AI. Are they now trustodians of a team, or how does that kind of look like, do you think, going forward?
So first off, very astute question. And when we were first talking about that, unless you were in the physical AI realm, which is a whole body under AI, whole category under AI, the statement that the workforce of the future may be a combination of humans, humanoid robots, and agents sounds a little bit futuristic.
Mm-hmm.
But I would point your attention to a development that's under a month old, and that is SoftBank acquiring ABB's robotics business unit for I don't know how many billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
That, in my mind, is the first stake in the ground towards mass deployment of humanoid robots in industrial and manual labor type environments. So good for picking up on that. That's the first of what I believe will be many that we see. But I'm going to use an example. So what you may or may not know from the last podcast is I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit organization that's working on not affordable, but housing that people can afford. It's specifically called workforce housing, and we believe that in the future, to solve the housing crisis in the United States, just based on the sheer number that we need to make, that we need to have something on the order of 100,000 new construction workers across the country. Well, our schools are not producing them. And with our immigration posture the way it is, massive labor shortage appearing. And so I believe, and the people I hang around with believe, that the workforce of the future in that particular industry is going to be a unionized occupation called a housing assembly technician.
Okay.
Notice I didn't say plumber,
Mm-hmm.
carpenter, electrician, but somebody who's going to be dealing with componentized assembly. And that their journey people or their most immediate workforce will be a collection of humanoid robots. And those two entities, the humans and the humanoid robots, will be collaborating in a virtual space. Think the meta world with
Mm-hmm.
glasses, etc., dealing with the assembly of the components that are on the job site that they're on at this exact moment in time. Now, if you think about that, that is all supply chain data. There will probably also be agents involved that will be coordinating with the manufacturing facilities and the shippers in terms of getting the right components to that job site in the right sequence so that they assemble properly. All you need to do is go to a factory that's producing, like if you've ever been through the Ford F-150 factory in Detroit, it's fascinating to watch. But everything is staged and the part shows up right as it's needed. Same kind of thing. And where the trustodian comes into play is many of those robots and those agents will be rentals. They will be the equivalent of you go to Enterprise to rent a forklift today, or you go to Hertz to get a van to deliver things. Well, you'll go to XYZ Corporation to rent 22 robots because you're going up 3 stories today on this particular thing. Well, they're going to get exposed to intellectual property, which
Of
is
course.
the drawings for that site, what the supply chain looks like. And where the trustodian piece comes into play is who's managing the intellectual property that that workforce is getting exposed to in that particular point in time. And that's where the PCN comes into play. That is a very forward-looking statement. I think it's more than 2 years away, but I believe it's fewer than 10 that we'll be seeing that environment.
100%. And I would agree with you. And we've actually had a couple founders on the podcast, maybe not on the physical AI side, but more on the software AI side, talking about building frameworks for teams to run on their own. So marketing teams, like in our example, have a marketing manager that's an AI agent, and then they have 4 marketing team members that all are responsible. So one's responsible for social media, or one's responsible for outbound messaging, one responsible for research. And then that manager, from the prompts or the information you give it, can now control and manage each piece individually. And just thinking on both sides of that is just very interesting to think about. It's very exciting, I think, especially as we see leaner teams come to market too with a lot of these products in the physical and in the software space. But thanks for going in depth with me and entertaining me on that topic. I kind of think similar to you do, so I'm glad that we had another chance to talk about it.
Well, thanks.
Um, of course. And from your vantage point right now, where are we on the adoption curve of provenance as a concept? Are we still pretty early, or are we hitting kind of adoption at a high level now, would you say, aside from maybe the semiconductor space?
Well, when I first started on this journey about 8 years ago, there were people talking about how they thought that the blockchain uh, growth was over, and what was happening is we were beginning to come down the backside of the Gartner hype cycle curve, and I believe that we are on the leading edge of the slope of enlightenment. If you're familiar with the Gartner hype
Hmm.
cycle curve, I think we're also in a similar position. Well, I actually think that artificial intelligence is at the apex of the curve, and that we're in a bubble in AI, no doubt about it. Question
100%.
is, when's it going to burst, and how big is the explosion going to be, and what are going to be the post bubble ramifications? So I think we've got there's going to be a downward slope on that curve. In terms of provenance in particular, the specific thing you're talking about, and the reason I brought up those two technologies is the Provenance Chain Network is not a blockchain company. We're not an AI company. We're a trust and transparency company that
Hmm.
uses a number of technologies, cryptographic encryption, blockchain, distributed ledger, artificial intelligence to deliver our solution set. But anybody that thinks that provenance is, I'm going to use the World Series metaphor because we just
Hmm.
came out of the World Series. But if provenance was the World Series, we might have just selected the teams and gotten on the buses to go to spring training.
Gotcha.
I believe it's that early. Now, what I can't tell you with any level of precision is the round trip journey going to be 18 to 24 months, or is it going to be 20 years? I don't think it's going to be 20 years, but I think it's probably in the, it's north of 18 months, but I think it's fewer than 5 years until we have to have this into play. And a lot of the adoption of the provenance is going to align with many of the movements that this country has been taking over the last several federal administrations about, and because this is not a partisan issue. This
Hmm.
has to do with the national security of the United States, and economic security is the rebuilding of our industrial base. And as that industrial base gets rebuilt, some of it's going to be here in the U.S., some of it's going to be with new trading partners or under new relationships with existing trading partners. And we're in the middle of that reconfiguration. If you watch what the president and the Commerce Department and the Treasury Department are doing, traveling around, and also the State Department, traveling around the world working out trade deals.
Hmm.
That's the laying down of the foundation where we're going to start to establish what the rules of engagement are, what standards are going to be used to determine compliance and those kind of things. So I think this is, it's starting. You're seeing it with rare earth metals. You're seeing it with semiconductors. We've seen it with microelectronics. You will see it with food sources. You'll see it with aeronautical parts, and the list goes on and on and on over the next 10 years. But I envision a day where when you go to consume a component of any kind, whether it be a soft drink in the grocery store, a medical device you have implanted in your body, semiconductor that goes into a critical component, that the absence of provenance will be the aberration, and it will be a reason to not consume that. So we flip from occasionally knowing what's going on to occasionally not knowing what's going on. It's a complete reversal.
Definitely.
E is equal to unknown. I don't know how long that's going to take.
100%. And something we talked about in the last podcast, switching a little bit as well, we kind of talked about workforce credentials a little bit. How has
Yes.
that sector evolved in the past 6 months since we talked? And are there any new ones coming online?
That's one that, because of a relationship with an investor and some of the places that we're working, that one I have to keep a little bit close to the vest. However, I will suggest to you, based on what we're seeing with the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and others, that workforce credentials and the need for those, plus the verification of those workforce credentials, will be absolutely paramount to all economic activity in North America by middle of 2027 and moving forward. These standards are not going to be relaxed. They're going to have to be done more and more. And one of the comments that I made, I was up in Canada a couple months ago talking about certain industry categories. And one of the things I said to our trading partners is, look, here's the reason why these things exist. You can complain about them, but you have to understand the reason why they exist. And these reasons are very, very valid for the safety and protection of American citizens and our way of life. And because it's an obligation, you as a trading partner with us have two options. One is option A, to complain and moan and wait until the last minute to do it. Or the other option is to take what is an obligation and turn it into a feature. Become one of the first to get there. And there are advantages to having that pole position of being one of a more transparent supplier to I talk about it from the American perspective, but it's not just America. It's North America. It's NATO. At the end of the day, it's the free world that this depends on this stuff. So
100%. Thank you for talking a little bit on it. I know that there's some secrets you got to keep close, but thank you for commenting on it. I think that, as you had just described perfectly, is something that's becoming of high interest for a lot of individuals right now, especially as we go into a lot of these developments in our political environment currently, regardless of the party. But going into my last couple of questions for you, Jeff, what's something about leading PCN right now that's maybe personally changed how you think about trust, not just in business, but maybe even in teams and leadership?
Well, I spend a lot of time talking with my team about Moneyball. If you're familiar with the Michael Lewis movie about Billy Beane and the Oakland Athletics and how they ran, built a team based purely on mathematical probabilities, et cetera. And they talked about the team being potentially an island of misfit toys, and I don't embrace that metaphor, but the metaphor was used as a way to describe that each of the people were selected for very specific talents. One of them being at the top of the list, which was the ability to get on base, because the way you win a World Series is to have the most runs. The way to have the most runs is to get the most people on base, and so every player has to be selected for that. And so the team that we've selected here at the PCN is the most amazing team that I've ever worked with from an intellectual horsepower perspective. And everybody comes from a very unique background. I mean, I've got from the former CIO of the United States of America, who's a board member, John Glenn's former chief of staff, to I've got advisors from inside the Pentagon. I've got former colonel in the Space Force running my government operations, to former Cisco executives, to some of the most sophisticated blockchain coders, people that helped develop the confidential computing environment in general, people who've developed protocols, all with one objective in mind, and that is to build out the most trustworthy commercial network on the planet, and to build out the technologies by which many, many people can use this to advance the interests of our society and our way of life. And that's a complex roundabout answer. There's no, thrifty, brave, and reverent discussion in there. But at the PCN, we hire for culture first, and then we hire for the embracing of the values and the mission that we're on. Because we're in a long march mission. This, as I think I said in the last podcast, what I'm up to is going to outlive me.
100%. And thank you for sharing. And on the topic of your team, looking into 2026 and even beyond, I know with the timeline for PCN, what's the big focus for you? Is it scaling? Is it partnerships? Or is it pushing even deeper, maybe into the semiconductor industry?
I can sum it up in one word. It's revenue. Where this come from is a framework that a friend of mine out of Seattle who runs a quantum venture investing firm. The way that she looks at companies is there's in one of three stages. They're in research, they're in roadmap, they're in revenue. And the PCN is sitting between roadmap and revenue. And we're circling back and forth on that because we've done all the research. We know what we have to build. We've built much of it. We still have a lot yet to do. But it's going to be based on proving that this is monetizable in the marketplace. So, yeah, call it revenue, call it scaling. But we believe 2026 is going to be a pivotal tipping point year from a revenue and execution perspective.
100%. And on that topic, if someone wants to be a part of the movement, what kind of people or partners are you hoping to attract right now?
So in terms of people, we've got three very specific functional areas we're hiring in, and that is cryptographic key management, that whole environment, and large language model engineering, and data analytics, data scientists. Those are the three specific areas from a heavy duty technical chops perspective. In terms of go to market, we're very heavily focused in the people who have strong business development chops in platform execution, how to take a platform technology and push it through distribution, through partnerships, et cetera. And the first ones of those that we're seeing are in the workforce management environment. So large employee bases, recruiting firms, et cetera.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing. And if you're a listener and you're interested, I'm going to leave Jeff's links to his LinkedIn if he's okay with that, along with the Provenance Chain website, just like the last podcast. But Jeff, it's always great having you on. I enjoy our conversation every time. Every time we talk, I feel like I learn 8 new things that I didn't know before, even if I prepared. But thank you again for coming on. And if you're listening and you're in semiconductors, defense, or any industry where trust is your product, definitely check them out. But thank you again for coming on, Jeff, and it was a great podcast.